Awakening the Spirit, the Birth of a Nation. To tighten their grip, the company introduced new land tax systems like the zamindari and ryotwari. A hard-working farmer named Maruthu found that the land he had tilled for generations no longer felt like his own. He was forced to pay heavy taxes in cash, regardless of whether the rains came or the crops grew. If he couldn't pay, the land he loved was snatched away and sold to the highest bidder. The greed of the company grew. They forced farmers to grow indigo, a blue dye for English factories, instead of food. Maruthu and his friends saw their soil turn sour and their families go hungry. In 1859, the farmers decided they had enough. They threw down their tools and refused to plant the blue crop. This was the Indigo Revolt, a spark of resistance that proved the people's will could not be ignored. Far away in England, the Industrial Revolution was roaring. Machines produced cloth faster and cheaper than any human hand could. Back in India, a skilled weaver named Anandi watched as her traditional loom fell silent. British-made goods flooded the markets, and the ancient industries that were the pride of India began to crumble, leaving millions of artisans without a way to survive. Then came the darkest years. Terrible famines struck Odisha and Madras, leaving the land parched and the granaries empty. While millions suffered, the colonial government continued to export millions of pounds of rice to England. Anandi and Maruthu stood in long lines, hoping for a grain of mercy, but the policy of non-interference meant that profit was valued more than human lives. Broken by poverty and hunger, many were forced to leave their homes. They were promised work in distant lands like South Africa and Sri Lanka as indentured laborers. Maruthu joined a long line of people boarding massive ships, carrying nothing but a small bundle of clothes and the heavy memory of the motherland they were leaving behind just to find a way to eat. But in the darkness, voices of reason began to rise. An elderly scholar named Dadabhai Naoroji looked at the numbers and saw the truth. He spoke of the drain theory, explaining how India's wealth was being systematically siphoned away. He was the grand old man of India, and his words began to teach the people that their poverty was not a twist of fate, but a result of exploitation. As the years passed, the call for freedom grew louder and bolder. Bal Gangadhar Tilak stepped forward with a message that electrified the youth. "Swaraj is my birthright, and I shall have it," he declared. He used festivals and newspapers to bring people together, turning a quiet dissatisfaction into a powerful, thundering demand for self-rule. In 1915, a new light arrived on the shores of India. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi returned from South Africa, bringing with him a unique weapon, satyagraha, the power of truth and nonviolence. He didn't just speak to the leaders, he walked with the farmers and the weavers, wearing the same simple clothes as they did. He transformed the movement from a political debate into a march of the masses. The spirit of nationalism had finally awakened. From the fields of the south to the mountains of the north, people realized they were not just subjects of an empire, but citizens of a great nation. Students, workers, and elders joined hands, ready to reclaim their future. The journey was long, but the identity of a unified India was born, and the path to freedom was now clear. The Awakening, India's Journey to Freedom. In a dusty attic in Chennai, 14-year-old Jayan discovered a heavy, brass-bound chest belonging to his grandfather Selvam. Inside were faded newspapers and a rusted tin of coffee beans. Selvam sat beside him, his eyes sparkling with the weight of memory. "These aren't just trinkets, Jayan," he whispered. "They are the seeds of a nation waking up. Before we were free, we were a land of tradition being reshaped by a foreign hand." Selvam began to tell the story of the 1800s, a time of great change and greater struggle. Selvam described how education once lived in tin-eye schools, where children gathered under trees to learn from a village guru. But in 1835, a man named Lord Macaulay changed everything. He wanted to create a class of people who were Indian in blood and color, but English in taste. Western education was introduced to create clerks for the British Empire. By 1857, grand universities rose in Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta, teaching science and law, but also planting the unintended seeds of liberty in the minds of young Indians. The story darkened as Selvam spoke of the land. Under the British, land became a commodity to be sold. High taxes under systems like the zamindari and ryotwari crushed the farmers. When the rains failed, the taxes did not. To survive, many were forced to work on indigo and coffee plantations. "Look at those coffee beans, Jayan," Selvam said. "They represent the sweat of thousands who had no choice but to leave their ancestral homes just to stay alive." Between 1837 and 1877, millions of Indians were driven by famine to become indentured laborers. They boarded ships for distant lands like Sri Lanka, Mauritius, Fiji, and Trinidad. Selvam described the crowded decks of the ships where families clutched small bundles of hope. In 1877 alone, a terrible famine drove nearly 380,000 Tamil laborers to the coffee estates of Ceylon. They were migrants in search of bread, carrying their culture to every corner of the globe. In London, a brilliant man named Dadabhai Naoroji was watching. He noticed something terrifying. India was getting poorer while Britain grew richer. He formulated the drain of wealth theory, proving that Britain was taking millions of pounds worth of resources and taxes out of India every year without any return. He spent his life researching the Odisha famine and writing his famous book, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, to show the world the truth of India's plight. The year 1857 changed the spirit of the people forever. What started as a revolt by soldiers soon became a massive uprising against foreign rule. Though the British crushed the rebellion with great severity, the memory of the struggle lived on. Selvam explained that the British became more suspicious, passing laws to disarm Indians and isolate them. But the fire had been lit. The people realized that they were not just a collection of kingdoms, but one people with a common enemy. Education had given Indians a new weapon, the printing press. Vernacular newspapers like Swadsamitran and Amrita Bazar Patrika began to speak to the masses in their own languages. Simultaneously, scholars like William Jones rediscovered India's ancient greatness, translating Sanskrit texts into English. "We began to look back at our history with pride," Selvam said. "We realized we were an ancient civilization that deserved to be masters of its own destiny." Realizing they needed a unified voice, Indians began to form political groups. First came the Madras Native Association in 1852, and later, the Indian National Congress was born in December 1885. Leaders like W.C. Banerjee and A.O. Hume met in Bombay to demand a say in how their country was run. They were doctors, lawyers, and teachers, the first generation of moderates who used petitions and speeches to fight for their rights. But as the years passed, some felt that petitions were not enough. A bold leader named Bal Gangadhar Tilak emerged, his voice like thunder. He rejected the begging for rights and instead declared, "Swaraj is my birthright, and I shall have it." He used festivals and newspapers to bring the message of freedom to every household. The movement was no longer just for the educated few. It had become a heartbeat that pulsed through the entire nation. Selvam closed the chest and looked at Jayan. The struggle was long, Jayan. It was built on the research of Naoroji, the courage of the 1857 rebels, and the wisdom of our teachers. Jayan looked at the old newspaper in his hand, no longer seeing just paper, but a map of a journey. He felt a surge of pride for the farmers, the thinkers, and the fighters who turned a colony back into a country. "I understand now, Grandpa," Jayan said. "Our freedom was earned with every drop of ink and every grain of coffee."